Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we get closer to the G20, it's actually becoming more apparent as to what's going on in terms of politics in South Africa. All of the warts and all seem to be coming to the surface, and many people are asking, logical questions around the future of the country. But before I can get onto the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. Could really appreciate that coffee right now, because where I am, bloody cold. In any case, let's get on to the main news story. And the first news story is actually a follow-on from my video yesterday, which is around the push for Ramaphosa to resign. Now, if you watched my video from yesterday, you'll know that there seems to be this internal push inside the ANC to get Ramaphosa to step down after the G20. Now, Gator Mackenzie came out and said that removing Ramaphosa would be a massive mistake. And he says that there are several internal factions inside the ANC, and that he says that there are real attempts to remove Ramaphosa after the G20 summit. He says that the GN stability is fragile, and Mackenzie effectively says that he's begging the ANC to keep Ramaphosa in place and not collapse the GNU. Now, Gator Mackenzie says that there's a reason for this. He says that he's praising economic improvements. He says we're currently seeing strong rand, we're seeing inflation down, and job creation. He argues that Ramaphosa is the only thing preventing the ANC from imploding, and an imploded ANC would mean the rand would crash. Now, it's important to understand that Gator says he's not supporting Ramaphosa, he's not protecting him. What he's actually doing is they're protecting their own power within the GNU. He says that the war has started inside the ANC and that political sabotage is happening right now behind closed doors. Now, all of this is on the back of Ramaphosa's so-called South Africa is recovering narrative, because Ramaphosa gave a pre-G20 feel-good message. He says that we've had 250,000 new jobs created, unemployment has dropped from 33.2% down to 31.9%. He says Eskom is stabilizing and government's finances are improving, which has resulted in the S&P upgrades to South Africa's credit rating. Now, the reason he's doing this is that he thinks that if he gives this feel-good message, it will shield him from ANC rebels. The entire narrative is meant to kind of justify his continued leadership after the G20, with a South Africa is back message, which he intends to give at the G20. So the idea behind this is to sell these short-term improvements and to sell the idea that Ramaphosa has been a success and that he should continue in his position as president after the G20. Now, talking of the G20, as you know, South Africa will be the first African country ever to host the G20. And of that, 42 countries have confirmed going. We've got the G20, which is down to like the G16, because Putin's not coming, Xi's not coming, Trump's not coming. Their countries are coming, by the way, except for the US. So you could say it's effectively the G19 without the US. In any case, we've also got 16 guest nations and 6 regional blocks, which include Africa, the Caribbean, and East Asian groups. Now, Ramaphosa has invited everybody and sundry to come. And the idea here is that he's somehow going to have some form of international legitimacy for the G20, which will give him a form of diplomatic prestige. And could potentially spell a stint for him to say, actually, I'm credible, I should be the leader of the global south. But the biggest shadow still remains. The US is absent and South Africa is spinning. This is not a big deal, but it kind of is, because again, if you watched my video yesterday, you would have noticed that one of the things the US says they're not going to do is accept any declaration that the summit comes up with. So whatever policies they put in place, the US says, we're not going to adopt those. Now, China has stepped in, a Chinese scholar, that is, and he's dismissed Trump's absence. And he says that really what we're seeing here is that Western-style democracy is failing. According to him, the Chinese model is superior, and China is the real dependable global South partner. Now, it's interesting how China's trying to spin this as somehow a way for them to have a power play. But Xi Jinping's not coming himself. Even Xi's not coming. Okay, so he's going to send some minor government individuals to the G20 so that at least he can have his space occupied by some kind of Chinese presence. For China to suggest that they're the stabilizer and a reliable global power where the US creates chaos is, I'm not really sure, a genuine statement. I mean, if you really look at the Chinese influence in South Africa, it's not always positive. In fact, the fact that Xi's not coming himself kind of shows you that he himself doesn't have faith in the summit. So odd way for them to frame that America can't be trusted, but somehow they can. But I mean, that's the Chinese model, I suppose. Now, France is really interesting in the whole G20 thing because they publicly supported South Africa's G20 goals. And their motivations appear to be somehow to maintain influence in Africa, even though France is not influential in Africa at all. France is not even influential in Europe. Nobody gives a flying whatever about France anymore. It's like a has-been country. Now, France is fearful that they're going to lose the continent entirely to China, and I don't think they should be fearful. It's pretty much ordained at this point in time. But France's goal ultimately is to position themselves as a Western-friendly voice in the global South, and Paris wants to somehow look supportive but also relevant. But I don't really know how we could say that France itself is still a Western power. France itself, specifically around the capital, has so much Islamization going on that I'm not really sure you can still class France as Western. Maybe Middle Eastern is more accurate. Now, overnight, the US criticized the South African-led summit, calling it basically the G100. This is an allusion to how many people South Africa is inviting. We're inviting everybody and their dog. Now, Washington's objectives are that South Africa's invited too many global South guest nations, kind of true, and that South Africa's priorities dilute the original G20 purpose. He says that South Africa is leaning too far into the BRICS-style multipolarity world, this idea that there's going to be all this different regional players, and that this in itself is a diplomatic slap in the face to the US. According to them, their absence shows that the US-SA relationship is now at the worst point in years. Now, Lamola and Gordon Guano are somehow trying to project confidence in G20 and South Africa as a whole. And they're suggesting that the declaration, this is the declaration that will be at the end of the G20, is still on track. And the consensus building continues, and that the US is still welcome to come. But South Africa is still terrified that the summit will fail, because if it fails, it will force Ramaphosa's resignation. The ANC factions want to weaponize G20 embarrassment, and the government is desperate to show we can lead Africa even without America. But I'm not really sure South Africa can lead anything, including a soup kitchen. Now, from the US perspective, let us not forget that there was the article around Nigeria's persecution of Christians, and that Trump had said that he would militarily get involved if it continued. Well, Trump issued this aggressive warning to Nigeria. This happened a couple of weeks ago. Now, Nigeria immediately ran a narrative of security concerns with the US, meaning that the US influence in Africa remains powerful. Trump still uses intimidation as diplomacy, and the African nations are adjusting quickly to the new era of US foreign policy. So to somehow say that Africa will pivot completely to China, well, Nigeria shows us that that's not really the case. Because unlike South Africa, Nigeria continues to engage with the US, whilst South Africa defies the US. There's different political strategies involved and difficult outcomes. And so what could this mean? Well, what it could mean is that Nigeria takes over the position of South Africa and becomes the actual voice of Africa going forward. And again, if you watch my video around could South Africa lose their position in the G20, one of the countries that are highlighted as a potential alternative to South Africa is Nigeria. Now, talking of Trump, the reason that he wants to portray this whole power narrative is because he still considers himself to be a global peacemaker. And this is after Trump celebrated the UN Security Council vote in Gaza. Now, for those of you who don't know, obviously there's the Gazan peace agreement with Israel, or the ceasefire, and that had to be voted on in the Security Council, specifically in terms of sending the international force to Gaza to secure peace. Now, that got passed overnight, and it's important to understand that unlike South Africa, America and many Middle Eastern countries actually negotiated a ceasefire, whereas South Africa banned everybody and took them all to the ICJ and contributed nothing. So Trump frames this as somehow peace all over the world because he got this vote through. Now, I'm not really sure how he comes to that conclusion, but fine, let's see what he has to say. According to Trump, he wants to rebrand himself as a global stabilizer, and he wants to claim the Middle East peace as his success. Now, he's emphasizing American leadership, contrasting it directly with China's narrative, because even China didn't actually get involved in this. America did, and they did somehow secure peace. We say secure peace, but I'm not really sure how secure the peace is yet. In any case, we have to contrast this with South Africa, which talked about the global South unity, but Trump is actually doing stuff. He's doing stuff in Nigeria. He's done stuff in the Middle East. South Africa continues to talk and wants to have talk shops like the G20. And this is why South Africa seems to want to claim that the US is undermining global cohesion, because unlike South Africa, it's not just sitting there talking a nice talk, it's actually using its own strength and power to effect change. Now, on to a very final news story. And this is the story around the refugees that we've had come into the country from Palestine. Now, the current reports are, as of today, we've got 350 of these individuals that have now come to South Africa. We knew about the second plane load, didn't know about the first, and it's been confirmed that there are now 350 Palestinian refugees in South Africa. So why is this important? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I show you and I give you this clip. Have a watch.
Palestine! Free, free! Palestine! Free, free! Palestine! Free, free! Palestine! From the river to the sea! Palestine! From the river to the sea! Palestine! From the river to the sea!
Now, you see, this clip is important because you are going to start seeing a lot more of this in South Africa. You're going to see a lot more of these refugees carrying flags from the countries that they so-called fled. You're going to see identity politics, a lack of assimilation, and the same form of mass migration that's overwhelming Europe. And in many areas, you're going to have cultural pressures which will drive geopolitics. As we see in the UK, there's numerous individuals that get voted to positions of powers on pro-Gaza positions. Now, Western states themselves are internally unstable because of identity crises and demographic shifts. Now, the global South, countries like South Africa, are trying to position themselves as global leaders. And this could be a time where they could rise and be like, okay, you guys have lost your identity. We've found ours. You continue to import people from the Middle East like this, and we're going to have the same lack of identity, the same demographic shifts that they're experiencing in the West. And with that, you will see a lot more of these type of protests. This one's rather muted. You're going to see a lot more of this in the future, guys. So let me know what you think of that in the comments section below. In any case, until tomorrow, bye.